Okay, folks, Eric the Surveyor here. Just thought I'd go over a subject I've really been wanting to go over for a long time, and that is how to survey your property using ONX. And it's really an interesting subject because ONX is used by hunters, fishermen, hikers, off road folks to make sure they're not on private property, which is honorable and admirable and also practical, right? So sometimes, though, and I've been on chats and stuff, there's a lot of people who are like, well, how accurate is it? And that's the problem, right? And a lot of times, what it is if you present somebody with something on paper or on your app, then they're like, well, this is where it's at, right? But a lot of times there's a misunderstanding on the origins of those property lines shown on these applications. So what I did is I zoomed into some random spot on OnX, and you can go and see how they've got a property line going through this building. I mean, this is quite substantial. I just randomly found this too. You can go from here to here. It's 10 yards or 11 yards. I mean, that's a lot. So, and that's not the only place you're going to find that. It's going to be all over the place. And you could zoom in here, and there's a line going through a building, and see, here's a housing authority parcel in Colorado. So with a landing pad on it, you're like, well, where's the housing authority parcel? There it is, right there. But is this property line, over here? You know, you just can't rely on it that much, right? So let me zoom out of here just to save everyone headaches. But what we're going to do is we're going to discuss my house here, and then we're going to answer the question how to survey with OnX. So first of all, let's just go to my house here, and let me open it up, move it over. So here's my house. Everyone knows what my name is. So if you look closely, there's this orange line. Let's see if I can use a highlighter or something. Let's see if edit image. Is there a way to mark it up? We've got this line here, right? And it looks like it's going through my garage. Well, I've been out here. The surveyor set the marks for my property, okay? And it's not there. It's not going through the garage. And if you go to Google, it's the same thing. It looks a little bit different in Google. It looks like it fits occupation a little bit better, but it doesn't. It's just, well, in reality it does, but it's the same lines as OnX, but I think OnX uses a different provider for their imagery than Google does, and this just happens to have been taken. The plane is flying at a high altitude, and it just happened to compile the photography at an angle that makes it look like it fits better, for lack of a better explanation. So anyway, my house does not do that. It doesn't have the property going through it. Now, what is interesting about my house is on the edge of a phasing for a development. And so there's, different phases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the developer phases subdivisions in case they go bankrupt or they want out of it, they can just finish that phase and be done with it. So it's a way to prevent them from losing a bunch of money, essentially, is the short story. So a lot of times the banks like it, the cities like it too, because then they know that this phase will get built and then that first phase funds the second phase. And as the phases progress, the homes get more expensive and yada, 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 right? So mine's on a phase boundary. So you could look on ONX and see that the line's going through the garage. Well, you could actually walk over to my front property corners and you'll see 3 leaden tags. And one of them looks like it matches ONX. And so somebody who's a novice might go, well, ONX says it's going through the property, and here it is, here's the corner. But if they look over to the right, they just look, they'll go, oh, oh. And then the final one to the right is the one that matches the fence. I was going to make a video out in the field of it, but honestly it would require too much editing. But hopefully that story makes sense. Now, let's see what we can do here. So the big question is, how do I survey my property using ONX? So I thought I would just go back to my property here and just show everyone that yes, in fact, you know, this is my parcel here, right here. And you can see that there's this phasing boundary on the west side of my property, the northwest side. And there's like a 10.53 foot jog in the phased boundary there. There's actually 3 monuments there. I think there's a curve in there, a tiny little curve. Anyway, if you look, that's the assessor's map. You know, here's the survey I did. There's the tract boundary, right? And there's another one here. I'm just working off memory, but basically there's 3 monuments here. So you could look at ONX and mistakenly look at ONX and think, well, you know, maybe it's really there. I'm trying to get to that for you here. This is the problem with winging your video. So here you go. Here's the house. Here's the property line. Look like it's going through the garage. Well, you could go out there and see a mark that isn't, you know, doesn't look like it's right here. Let me use my pen here. The mark is really, you know, the property line's really over here, right? And it kind of goes like this, right along that fence. It's right on the fence. But you might go out there and see this other mark 10 feet away and go, oh, well, that's the property. So there's the inherent error in trusting ONX, okay? And trusting is a limited thing. You can trust ONX to a limited degree, right? So if you're in a national forest and there's private land within that forest, which happens all the time, see if we can actually find a sample of that for you. You might be up in the forest and you might, you know, you might want to just make sure. Here's a better one. Let's say that you're out hunting, and so there's this national forest here, which is the John Muir Wilderness, but then there's this national park. Oh, that's also a legitimate. Where's the national park? There's Yosemite and Sequoia, and you know, like a national park to avoid trespassing, right? So here's an example. You're in the forest, and then this guy, you know, owns a couple parcels in the forest. Well, all you're trying to do is avoid trespassing. Now there's this road, and so you go up this road, and it gets windy, and then at a certain point, right, you're going to enter upon his property. So anything, even in the public road here, you can't hunt or shoot because it's on his property. And then you leave it at a certain point, and then you're back onto the national forest. So all you're trying to do is honor his private property rights and not infringe on his rights. Okay? Now, how accurate are these lines? Well, it goes back to my parcel. Wasn't very accurate. It was off 10 feet, basically. Okay? His lines being accurate within 10 feet out here in the middle of nowhere is fantastic. That's really good, because you can be driving your car and you might see a fence that matches your ONX. You're looking at your ONX and you're looking at that and you go, pretty good. Now, what if this was 700 feet off? Well, then that would be a problem. And yes, I do have clients where the ONX and the assessor's lines are all off 750 feet. And so it does cause problems, because some hunters are thinking that they're on BLM land or national forest land, and they're not. And the reason why hunters sometimes push back is because I know for a fact that many owners will basically have the following attitude, okay? If they catch you on their property on the other side of their fence, they're going to kick you off, right? Which they have every right to. But if ONX, instead of being coincident with their fence, actually has them owning 300 feet of public land, that same owner will point to ONX and go, hey, you're on private land, even if he knows you're not, because he doesn't want you around. So a lot of times hunters are aware that a lot of owners do have this attitude of kicking people off that they have no right to kick off. And it happens here locally. You know, the riverbed is owned by the state because of the equal footing doctrine. It's a navigable river, and there's no trespassing signs by people who think they own the river. They don't. Sorry. And they will try to kick you off. And the police won't come and enforce it, by the way, the local sheriff, because guess what? They're aware, and so are the game wardens, that the bed of the navigable river is owned by the state of California, and because of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, the feds regulate activities. And so that's why hunters can go shooting in a river bottom in California and not be violating any laws, because it's perfectly legal. But yes, owners will try to kick people off of land that is actually public. And so a lot of hunters will push back on that because of that. Or fishermen or hikers or boaters. Me personally, I don't like the drama. So if I'm using ONX and there's a fence 200 feet away, I just assume the fence is the property and I'll steer clear of that, right? Fence could be wrong a couple hundred feet, but I'm not out there to do free surveying work. So how to survey your property with ONX? Well, the reality is it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to grab the mapping and the final maps, and you're just going to have to do that. And there's just no way around it. And you're also going to have to try and find those markers yourself. And maybe you will, and maybe you'll do it, and maybe you'll be fine. But you just have to be careful that you're not putting too much trust into ONX, because it will lead down at a micro level, not the macro, but the micro level. It could be off 10 feet, or maybe it's only off a foot or two. I think if we go to downtown Santa Barbara real quick and we zoom in there, let's see. I'm going to have to zoom out and make sure I know where I'm going here. Let's go to downtown Santa Barbara and see what it says. Alright, I've completely messed this up. Here we go. Let's go here and just zoom in. And so here's a property line kind of going on the edge of this guy's house, but there's a driveway and it looks like it matches. So, you know, this is probably within a foot or two. But you know who lives there, and you know roughly where it's at. And then the other question is, then you're like, okay, well then, you know, where's this property line on this section? You know, here's a section line, it's gray, right? And, you know, here's some sort of property out here. It says that it's the city of Santa Barbara owns it. Well, how reliable is this corner here? Like, it just depends on, these are all taxation maps these are from. That's where they're from. They're taxation maps. They weren't designed to actually be survey grade, nor do they need to be. Right? So it gives you an idea where stuff is at, and it might give you a really good idea. And it's kind of like what happens too is a lot of real estate agents will show up to a site and they'll go, hey, see, there'll be a ranch, and they go, see the power poles? That's the property line. It's like, no, that utility company has a 10-foot easement for that line, and they also had a clause in the easement that said wherever we build the power poles. So it could be 50 feet off. So a lot of it just depends on what record the assessor used to create this mapping. So just because it shows those lines doesn't mean it's actually true. But it's relatively true, and it's relatively helpful, right? So if you're off-roading somewhere and you know there's private property up there somewhere, and you've got ONX, and it's like, hey, there's this Lands of Smith here, he owns a section, and you go driving and you kind of run into it in a couple hundred feet, there's a fence. Well, you're like, okay, even though it says it's public land on the other side of that fence 200 feet, more than likely this fence is a better estimation of where the property is and might actually be right on the property, so I'm just going to stay out of it. That's the purpose and intent of ONX. It's not, they didn't go and survey all the parcels, and the assessor didn't either. Now, if some of you are still listening, there is a little bit of a history with those assessors' GIS lines. And what happened was in the 1990s and early 2000s, GIS was coming out. And so what they did is companies here locally sent out surveyors to make ties to major monuments, major section corners, and major rancho corners. And then they also sent them into the cities mostly and tied out major points. And then they compiled all the record data, gave it to the county assessor, and said, hey, look, see what we can do? We can provide this service to you. Then the county assessor here locally ended up doing it all in-house anyway. They just took that free data and built on it. They decided not to hire any of those companies. But that is why the assessor's lines are georeferenced somewhat accurately in the cities, and then it gets worse and worse as you go out into the boonies, right? Because they didn't send the surveyors out there to do that. And it also is why in some of the cities, like where I live, the lines aren't that accurate because they didn't survey my parcel. It didn't even exist in the 1990s. So it's just all record data compiled so they can know who to foreclose on, know who to send the sheriff to when you don't pay your tax bill. That's the whole intent of it. And you can use it when you're out fishing, hunting, biking, hiking, camping, to know where the BLM land is, know where the national park land is, and it gives you a great idea of that on a macro level. But on a micro level, it's nothing to hang your hat on. So hopefully this helps. Let me know what you think. And that's all I got.